99% of people who come to me are way missing their daily carbohydrate goals. I'm talking about like hundreds of grams of carbohydrate. So to me, being more generous with our fueling is an easy way to stay ahead of things and or kind of get ourselves out of an unintentional underfueling hole that, for the most part, if you are training for an ultra or doubling and tripling, there's not much to be lost by taking in 30 grams of carbohydrate on an hour run.
And welcome back. We have Stevie Smith joining on the podcast today for her millionth appearance on For the Long Run. Stevie, welcome back.
You know, always happy to be here. You know, I'm a big friend and fan of the pod.
At some point, you've eclipsed David Roche as the most repeated guest. So
Wow.
Your episodes are some of the most popular. I think people are just interested in some practical fueling and practical tips as it relates to nutrition. So for those who haven't tuned into an episode with Stevie before, who is Stevie?
Yes. Who is Stevie? Well, Stevie is a registered dietitian, board certified in sports nutrition. She is also a dog mom and a small business owner. And I like to think, you know, kind of like doing it all in the sports nutrition world, between writing, yapping, working one-on-one, working with groups. Like you said, love to give practical nutrition tips that are actually applicable to us as human beings and endurance athletes. Oh, I always forget, I'm also an endurance athlete.
And a podcast host.
And a podcast host. See, I just do all of the things because it's just all very exciting and nice to kind of be in the endurance and sports world in a lot of different, you know, avenues. I'm an author too, right?
There we go. Yeah. Stevie has also joined me in the Long Run Labs network effort. Stevie's the essentially project manager, and the whole house would fall down without Stevie managing the details. So we're going to talk through some of the partnerships that have come to fruition and some of the pieces that we're excited to bring to the For the Long Run community as well as the running community at large. Stevie, before we dive into it, can you explain the difference between a dietitian and everybody else on the internet?
Yeah. So, a dietitian, there is definitely a very calculated and regulated path, educationally. And then after education, that a dietitian has to follow along, starting with an accredited program, in a related degree. There are different ways to kind of get that degree. what you do undergraduate wise. My bachelor's of science was in dietetics and nutrition. You can do other health related sciences and then kind of take a different track. Basically, I have to have a bachelor's degree in a related health science. And now, as of 2024, it's required that all new individuals who want to become a dietitian have a master's degree. It was not required when I became a dietitian, but I did go back and get my master's of science in applied nutrition. We also have to do 1,200 hours of supervised practice before we can sit for that board exam. Then we have to take a national board exam to get the RD credentials and then do continuing education throughout our career. I mentioned that I'm board certified in sports nutrition. That is something additional. There are also other specialties as well within the nutrition field, but to say you're a sports dietitian, that CSSD credential, you then have to practice. You have to be practicing 2 years and have 2,000 hours working with athletes before you can even apply to sit for the board exam. And then you have to sit for the board exam, pass. And that one in particular, we have to recertify every 5 years. So I just had to retake that board exam, which standardized test taking is like my least favorite thing in the entire world. So it was slightly traumatic, but always good to go back and, you know, like brush up. There was a lot of new information, especially around tactical nutrition on my exam. So lots of learning, ongoing learning, and a process. And then everybody else on the internet
eats.
They eat. I mean, there are other nutrition, like I'm thinking like CNS, where there's like a little bit more rigidity to their program. But most people on the internet either took like a weekend certification course or maybe has their master's in nutrition, which is not nothing, but it's just a less regulated space. And basically anyone can call themselves a nutritionist. So when someone calls themselves a dietitian, it's like they've gone through that whole rigorous process, right? It's just kind of like you think about your doctors, like you want your doctors to go through all of that training and education, right? So same with your nutrition professionals. A very
Yes.
long-winded answer. So sorry.
Yeah. So I know there are a lot of dietitians that listen to this show, and so I'm sure they'll appreciate that lengthy explanation. But I also wanted to preface the rest of our conversation with like, where is this coming from, and why does Stevie feel like she can give guidance to people on the internet? Because I think the challenge with nutrition guidance is like everyone eats and everyone has feelings about like their own
Mm-hmm.
diet, and the dogmatic, like it must be this way, versus people who think that they're outliers, or and likely aren't, and then something has worked for them, or they have good genetics, etc.,
Yeah.
and then they become preachy on the internet. So we're going to approach this episode with best practices and principles for fueling, talking about what to think about as we go longer in races, what to think
Mm-hmm.
about from a training standpoint, and how we think about what we're putting into our body, and when we need to start thinking about fueling, even just in training.
Mm-hmm.
I've referenced this story about 1 million times on the podcast, so longtime listeners will be like, "Ugh, this again." But when I first started adding some more carbs to my long runs, specifically going above like 50 or 60, up closer to 80, I remember texting you one day. I had done like 2.5 hours, and then I was moving furniture for like 4 hours, and
Mm-hmm.
I texted you to say like, "Oh, I didn't feel like a vegetable needing to nap," and I was actually able to do like 4 hours of furniture moving after running for 2.5 hours. I had like 85 grams of carbs an hour on that day, and you were like, "Yeah, duh."
Duh.
So so let's start with fueling, high carb fueling. Who is it for? What does high carb even mean? This comes from someone who ironically used 2 servings of UCAN for my first marathon in 2013, bonked real hard at
Mm-hmm.
mile 18, and spoke with Lisa McDowell, who is the current dietitian of the Red Wings and kind of like the godmother of sports
Mm-hmm.
nutrition. She said something I'll always remember, which is, "John, you got to eat more carbs and eat more sugar and take more caffeine." And so I did, and had a great next few races. But anyway, long preamble to say, like, why why is high carb fueling having a moment? What is it about like refueling at some higher level than most people are used to?
Mm-hmm.
And in the framework of like, most people listening to this are not professional athletes, and many of them are running 10 or 12-minute miles. And so should they be thinking about fueling in this same regard, or is it really about intensity versus pace? A lot of
Yeah.
questions.
Yes. So, you know what? That's okay. I gave you a really lengthy answer to start. So I'll take a really lengthy question right back. Yeah, so much to unpack, but all good questions. So what is high carb fueling? There really is no official definition. It's kind of like a moving target depending on who you're talking to, what context you're talking in. But basically, it's changing too, right? You're hearing people and professionals taking up to 120 grams of carbohydrates per hour. Whereas like before, 60 grams per hour used to be the top end. Then it kind of shifted into 60 to 90. You'll hear a lot of people say 60 to 90 is high carb fueling. I tend to just not say high carb fueling. I just say fueling or fueling with carbohydrates, because when we're thinking about, if I'm working with a client or even, with myself, when we're thinking about like, okay, what's our carb per hour goal? It's all very individual. It's all nuanced. Like, yes, duration and intensity are going to play a factor in there, but we're kind of looking for each individual for a sweet spot. Like, what is that gram of carbohydrate per hour where you can, one, actually execute it and like take in the planned amount on race day between carrying it, tolerating it. Like, yeah, thinking about taking in 100 grams per hour is like a great pipe dream, but like if that's something you cannot execute and execute your race plan, that is not the appropriate grams of carbohydrate per hour for you. For example, when I ran the Buffalo Marathon last year, I did some long runs at 100 grams per hour, and I could do it. But I was on the treadmill, but I was like, this feels a little, I don't know if this is it. I don't know if that's going to sit so well on race day. So I ended up doing right around 84 grams per hour on race day and felt great. And that was kind of like I found my sweet spot, that this is how much I can take in. I can tolerate it. For my data geeks, like if you look at my marathon like profile on Training Peaks, there is no aerobic decoupling. And a lot of people like really don't understand that's very tied to nutrition and hydration as well. I negative split by 5 minutes. My last 10K was sub 8 minute miles. My last 5K was right around a 7:30. I felt great. I went out later in the day, right? Like you couldn't look at a better file. Yes, training was important, but fueling with carbohydrates consistently in my workouts also helped me get those adaptations from the training, right? Like everybody gets so hyper focused on training, which is great, but nutrition is there to support those adaptations that we're trying to achieve. So, long story long to say, high carb fueling for some people might be 60 grams per hour. And this can always change. In my Ironman days, I did like 74 grams per hour. And like that worked for me. Now, if I were to go do a full Ironman, I try to go a little bit higher. So it's somewhere between usually that 60 to 90. You'll see some people go higher. In higher intensities, right? There's going to be a little bit more carbohydrate breakdown, oxidation. Do we shift that fueling too much? Not a ton, because I always tell people like, don't go out there and half-ass your fueling, right? Like if we're going out for a 2 hour, like easy to moderate effort long run, that should be the same fueling that you plan to do on race day, in my opinion. So we're training our gut.
Yeah, I did a podcast with the founders of Carbs Fuel a number of years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and they talked about the intensity component versus
Mm-hmm.
the pace. There's a difference between running a marathon and racing a marathon. I'm running a marathon in April. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not racing a marathon. My marathon PR is 2:59, and I'm attempting to run this race at like 4:30.
Okay.
It's part of the Mount to Coast Double Boston, and so they're taking it very easy in the first marathon. So it'll be like 4 to 4.5 hours. So there's the differential of like pushing threshold effort or just sub threshold effort for multiple hours, and then there's
Mm-hmm.
like, I mean, that might be like zone in between zone, like high zone 1, low
Mm-hmm.
zone 2 for me.
Yeah.
How do
Yeah.
you feel something like that? That's just like a longer day at a lower intensity than normal. And I asked that for a variety of reasons. One, this episode is brought to you by Vacation Races. We're going to talk about Bryce and Zion, and the jaunt that we had through Bryce Ultras is coming up in September of this year. I'm thinking about doing something fun there, and then Zion Ultras is in April. Those races are 50K, 50 mile, 100 mile. So the intensity of a 100 mile race, um, that's zone 2-ish all
Mm-hmm.
day kind of a
Mm-hmm.
thing. So when you're thinking about a lower effort, so for me, like a 4 to 4.5 hour marathon, how does that change, or something longer? How does that change the fueling? Do you need the 80 grams an hour for something like that?
Honestly, like, so for me, when I'm looking at it, like I put high intensity, long duration in the same bucket. Right? So long duration is over 2.5 hours. We're looking for 60 to 90 grams of carb per hour. Yes,
Cool.
the intensity is different, but like when we're thinking about exogenous or like outside carbohydrate sources from like gels, we're looking like at right about 60% of your VO2 max is kind of when that carbohydrate need is going to increase. So like a lot of people don't know if they're racing at like 60% of their VO2 max or not. But when we're out there for a long time, I tend to be more generous with the carbohydrates, at least hitting that 60 to 90 grams, even if we are working at a lower intensity. And this is also because that carbohydrate intake from outside sources is going to help you recover better after an effort like that. So like if it's a 4.5 hour effort, lower intensity for you, but you're turning out into another big effort the next day, the next week, we want to get optimal recovery from that. So other sports scientists, sports dietitians might feel a little bit differently. I'm still going to have you kind of at least get into that 60 to 90 range. Maybe you're not at your top end, but I would at least want that 60 grams of carb per hour. So we're not just completely depleting those glycogen stored, that stored form of carbohydrate. So we're setting you up for better recovery after that effort. Because if you are doing like a zone 2, 4.5 hour effort and you're training for an ultra, you still
Yeah, it's
probably
good
have a lot
training.
of
Yeah.
running to do still in the week
Right.
following. So we want to make sure we're recovering well, and that in workout carbohydrate is a piece of the puzzle to that. So kind of like more big picture rather than like hyper focusing on like, oh, well, I'm only doing 50% of my VO2 max for this effort, right?
I guess an easy way to think about that will be 2 of the precision packets per hour. And
Yep.
it's very simple, and I can chew on the chews or take the gels down. Yeah, 60 as a minimum makes a lot of sense for something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I've been curious about that. I've been working with one of the sports scientists at Precision to talk through what I did at Big Alta and the fueling and hydration of something like that, which ended up being a 308 duration. And I had increased the sodium intake because
Mm-hmm.
I've been tested quite high with that, and her guidance was like, you got to bump up your intake. I was at like 400 milligrams per hour, which is not enough. I more than doubled that and felt great.
Yeah, that's like, so like when we think about sodium per hour, that's so unique to each individual, but like the general range is like 300 to 600 milligrams per hour, like give or take. So like you were riding on the low end of that to begin with. I have said this on many a podcast, but I had a friend I did a sweat test with last year and he lost 7,000 milligrams per hour.
Oh my god, what?
Yes. I was like, dude, this is insane.
That's like 3 servings of a burger and fries
It was
per
wild,
hour.
and of course, like he was training for his first 70.3, and it was like a day where the, high heat, high humidity, East Coast, real feel like 105 by the time he got on the run. But you know what? He did it. He got through it. He finished.
So this is a good point. There are a lot of contributors to athletic performance, and so many of the athletes that tend to perform well in longer races or in hot conditions have a low sweat rate and a low sodium rate. I'm
Hmm.
plagued by having a high sweat rate and a high sodium rate, and so like by definition, I'm going to have a harder time. But if you can replace things like that, you can do a little bit better. But I'd venture to guess that most record holders and most people who are finishing well in hot races have both a low sweat rate and a low sodium rate. and
Hmm.
and sweating itself is the mechanism to cool yourself. And so people who sauna a lot
Hmm.
are more efficient at cooling themselves because their sweat rate increases earlier. And so if you sauna a lot, you're just getting more efficient at producing at that cooling mechanism, but it doesn't come at no cost. Talk
Hmm.
to me about how somebody might. I mean, this one might be a lot more obvious. How do you know if you're a salty sweater? How do you know if you're a heavy sweater? And what should those people do?
Yeah, so a lot of the times it's I tell people to lean into how they're feeling during and after. Obviously like cramping, a lot of salt on your gear, that's usually a sign that you are a heavy sweater, you're sweating a lot. But there are other things too, like GI issues can be, it's very nuanced here because I'm like thinking about a client who was like taking in like 2,000 milligrams of sodium per hour because sodium had a moment, and everybody's like, oh, more is better. Well, more is not always better. That was making her poop her pants. And like, she was still like a pretty high, like salty sweater. She was around 1,000 milligrams an hour, but she was taking in almost double what she needed, and it made her poop her pants. And we did a sweat test and we got some data and we just pulled it back and like adjusted a few things, and it was a game changer. But so like how you're feeling, GI issues can be an indicator. Feeling like dizzy, lightheaded. I always think about like headaches or sometimes feeling like cold after like a long run or a hot workout. Like that's doesn't always necessarily mean you need more salts, but that's something where I'm like, we want to look at your hydration before, during, and after your workouts. If we're feeling some of those things, feeling kind of like that tired, fatigue, nauseous, low appetite after your workouts as well, that can be an indicator that we need to kind of look at your hydration status. And some of it is just more of like, how do we balance these things that work for you? When I say hydration status, like if you feel those things, it doesn't automatically mean just add more sodium, but more of like, hey, we got to look at this, and are we balancing your fluid, sodium, and carbs in a way that fits your physiology more so?
Yeah, that all makes sense.
Yeah.
I was tested at 1366 mg per liter. Is that what
Mm-hmm.
that unit is?
Mm-hmm.
So what the math on that is per liter of sweat, and most people are losing a liter in, well, I guess that's the highly variable part, right?
Yes. Don't make me do math in my head.
No math, no
Um,
math needed.
no math needed. Yeah. So it's variable, right? Because you can have a low sweat loss with a high sodium concentration. You
Right.
can have a high sweat loss with a low sodium concentration. So, like, just because you sweat a lot doesn't automatically mean you're losing a ton of sodium. Like, yes, you are losing sodium. We're all going to lose sodium in sweat, but that's where it's very unique to each individual is that sweat sodium concentration.
What do you think the main differences are between training and racing half marathons and marathons and then moving up in distance?
Do you want to know what came right to my mind?
Yes.
Having the will to do longer distances.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
With the will to push yourself through longer training as someone who did one 50 miler and will never do another one again.
I meant from a fueling standpoint.
Oh, I know, but I wanted to tell you what my first thought was. If it was rapid fire, that was my
Yeah.
first thought.
Yeah.
From a fueling perspective, yes. Like obviously, so I like to think about like zoom out, right? Just by the nature of training for an ultra, your volume is very likely. I mean, this again depends on the person, how you train, but your volume is likely going to be higher. You are going to be putting more time in and day out. And like so many runners love to hyperfixate on their grams of carbohydrate per hour in their workouts that they forget to zoom out and like look at the big picture. And that is where over time, many of them tend to fall short and get themselves in a little bit of a pickle in underfueling, unintentional underfueling, injuries, right? Micronutrient deficiencies, all of those things, because they're not taking in account all of the time and that energy output and demands. Like the intensity training is obviously going to be different because you're like you said, you're going threshold, sub threshold. Like the intensity is going to be higher if you for most people who are racing a half marathon, racing their marathon. Whereas when I think about ultra, it's like, okay, intensity isn't going to be as high, but you're going to be out there a long time, even if you're fast. And that in and of itself is a high demand activity.
Let's go back to the training component. So
Mm-hmm.
for someone who's running more than like 3 or 4 miles a day, so I'll walk you through my week as an example. On Tuesdays, I do 8 to 10. On Wednesdays, I do a workout that's like 10 to 12. Thursdays, 8 to 10. Fridays, 6 to 8. Saturday, long run, so like 14 to 18. And then
Mm-hmm.
Sunday, either a cross train or like 75% of the Saturday run. Sometimes Thursdays I'll swap that 8 to 10 to like 90 minutes on the bike instead.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm doing sauna in there a couple times a week. So it's, I don't know, 8 to 10 hours of training
Mm-hmm.
per week. Up until a couple of years ago, I would never take in fuel outside of the Saturday and sometimes Sunday runs throughout the week.
Jail. Straight to jail, no trial.
Straight to jail. Um, I know you are notorious for taking carbohydrate drink on an hour activity.
Yes, sir.
Talk to me about when and why people should think about incorporating something into their weekly training beyond just in their long runs.
Hmm.
And is this all just a big scam by Big Sugar and Big Carbohydrate, who benefits from, David Roche talking about high carb fueling while he's sponsored by the feed?
Hmm.
Obviously, like, I also have a partnership with Precision, so I have a vested interest in promoting more carbohydrates on the run and on a weekly basis. I've worked with Tailwind, I've worked with Scratch. Like, I love me some carbohydrates, and I love helping people find the option that makes the most sense for them.
Hmm.
But again, I have a vested interest in somebody listening to this thinking that they should consume more carbs and heading to precisionfuelandhydration.com and using code LONGRUN26 for 15% off your first purchase. But like, why is that not a total ruse? And when should people start thinking about making that addition?
I'm team big carb, as you said, all the time. I'm very generous with fueling guidelines. Like, I am always going to reach for fuel, even if like the guidelines say you don't need this. And that
Or
is
Steve
just.
Magnus saying you don't need this.
Are you trying to trigger me right now? I saw that thread and I like started to reply and I was like, I can't
Yeah,
I
sit
can't
this
get
one
in.
out. Sit
Yeah,
this
I
one
was like,
out.
it doesn't matter, not all men, but anyways. Uh so to go back, the guidelines are going to say, like, if it's in over an hour to 90 minutes, 30 to 60 grams of carb. Um, Once you get over that 90 minutes, that's where we want to shift more towards over that 60 grams of carbohydrate. I think that's a great kind of like starting point for people. But speaking to ultra marathoners who are putting in big volume, or like myself training for 70.3, I am doubling or tripling most days of the week between strength, swim, bike, run. Is that we need to zoom out and look at our training week as a whole, right? You're doing 8 to 10 hours a week. Right now, I'm probably like 12 to 14 hours a week in my training as I'm peaking. So when we think about overall carbohydrate needs, just like in general, it's based off, how many hours a day are we working out at a moderate to high intensity? And 99% of people who come to me are way, way, way missing their daily carbohydrate goals. I'm talking about like hundreds of grams of carbohydrate. So to me, being more generous with our fueling is an easy way to stay ahead of things and or kind of get ourselves out of an unintentional underfueling hole that, for the most part, if you are training for an ultra or doubling and tripling, there's not much to be lost by taking in 30 grams of carbohydrate on an hour run, especially if you're going to turn out a big workout the next day, right? Like, there's only things to be gained, because when we're taking in those outside carbohydrates in the workout, our body isn't dipping into our glycogen stores, which most endurance athletes are probably running kind of like girl bossing close to the sun on those glycogen stores, where they're like barely topped off or they're pretty depleted. And like, we don't need our glycogen stores to be topped off like in a carb load, before a race all the time. Like, that is not something we're aiming for, but most athletes are depleted. So if we can take in, like, I'm thinking I have an hour run later, it's a tempo effort. I swam 4,000 yards this morning. I lifted. So like, I am going to take 2 scoops of Tailwind and a gel with me. And that is over the guidelines. That is generous for that hour run. But I know that I did efforts this morning and I have a long ride tomorrow. And this is one little thing that, like, it's that consistency, stacking, boom, 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 thing after thing. So when life happens and like I have a long meeting and I'm like, oh crap, it's been 3 hours since I ate something, I'm hungry. Like, this is a little thing to bridge the gap, basically. Long story long.
Makes sense. So when I talk through my week, that's like an idealized state. It's not
Uh-huh.
always like that, but it's often like that. My context is I don't have kids and I can get my training in and then usually dive straight into meetings, but I
Mhm.
get to eat beforehand. I'm about 40% of the people who responded to a survey from this audience have kids. So let's
Mhm.
talk about the component of like people who can't afford to be tired after their long
Yeah.
run. We've babysat Kate's niece and nephew a couple of times, and like
Mhm.
it was like full on. Like you go for a
Yeah.
run, and then it's like you're back in it.
Yeah.
Um, and God bless parents who like go do their thing and then can't just like sit on the couch or scroll Instagram for the
Yeah.
next 9 hours. I'm joking about that, but um, how and where does this help with like removing the brain fog
Yeah.
and avoiding the like 3 hour nap that I used to need so often post long run?
Yeah. I mean, the in workout fueling is a big piece of this, but just also kind of having dialed in fueling frameworks of before, during, after, especially after with my people with kiddos, right? We're coming up, my clients, we're coming up with a strategy of like, okay, these are our tools. And like, we need to make this as easy as possible for you to get at least some carbohydrates and protein in right after, because you got to get home. Like, you got to take, kid one here, kid two there. You have these, and then, go into your workday. So it's even more of a priority so you can show up. And like, this is for anyone, kids, no kids, like, some of the early signs of underfueling are those energy crashes, brain fog, increased feelings of anxiety, depressed mood, poor sleep, right? I know it's hard with kiddos and the sleep, like that's where things get messy. But when we are kind of in that underfueled state, even if it's just like within one day, those are some of the things we're going to feel. I always tell my clients, if you feel that energy slump in the afternoon, go get a snack, right? That is often your body just like asking for energy. So being generous with fueling those workouts, especially because time is precious, right? You're not going to get the full meal in right away, kind of like maybe me or Jonathan might after our workouts before we head into meetings. So keeping big piece of keeping that energy up and helping that recovery so you can chase all the kiddos is going to be that in-workout fueling, that pre-workout fueling, and kind of coming up with a simple recovery fueling strategy as well.
Makes sense. Let's pivot back to vacation races and Bryce and Zion. So, as I mentioned earlier, we have a partnership with Vacation Races. They put on amazing event experiences just outside of national parks across the US. I think that more people should touch grass, and going to national parks counts as touching grass. Um, it's so cool to be in these spaces. You and I spent the before times, like a couple of days right before the world shut down in 2020 in Bryce. It's just like an otherworldly place. Like, what a cool part of the country with the geology and what are they called? Hoodoos. Um,
Hoodoos.
and just like it's such a cool everything's red and the rocks are like tall and skinny and awesome and bizarre. So Vacation Races is hosting the Bryce Canyon Ultras September 19th. There have been a bunch of people that have used the code FTLR to sign up for 15% off. I'm thinking about doing that race. It would be really cool if we get a bunch of people to sign up and do it. We could do a little for the long run meetup, or it'll be for the short run before the long run. Um, but talk to me about, you've been to a lot of national parks recently. Talk
Yeah.
to me about some of the places you've been and what you love.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just about this time last year, I was out in Utah. I did the Mighty Five in Utah, including Bryce, Zion, Capitol Reef, Arches, and Canyonlands
Cool.
National Park. It's a very cool loop if you ever have the chance to do it, to see all of the different types of rocks. It's
Rocks
it is
rock.
rocks,
Geology rocks.
I mean, Utah rocks,
Utah
truly.
rocks.
And yeah, so that was a really epic trip. And I was so excited to see Bryce in a different light with less snow. Bryce is at what, 8,000 feet, I
Yeah.
think. For people who don't know me, I am a sea level queen. So it's always good for me to get a little thin air in these into these
In the
lungs,
pipes.
into the pipes. So yeah, it is epic. We did sunrise at Bryce, which was beautiful, on the rocks as well. I'm imagining with the race start, you're gonna get that nice sunrise as well too. You also can't go wrong with Zion. I actually got a permit for Angel's Landing. So I did that with the chains
Yeah,
and the skinny rocks.
I'm a no on that one.
Yeah, I didn't have many takers to go with me. I just had one other person go with me, but that was totally worth it. It's just such a gorgeous part of the country and very different. Like went to Moab too while we were out there. Did some like little dune buggy riding, which is very different than, self-propelling yourself, but also just something very different and very cool to do. If you ever got me to do another ultra again, it would be something associated with vacation races and outside of these national parks. That's a big
Well,
if.
see you September 19th in Utah. Um, okay, let's pivot to another brand that we've been working together on. I want to talk about we've talked about carbohydrates.
Mm-hmm.
Let's pivot to protein. Big protein guy over here. Let's talk about the protein requirements for runners.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, tell me 30,000 foot view of protein.
So yes, protein. Well, protein is having a moment right now. And while protein is important and something we want to consider, I want to share one of the trends that I'm kind of seeing with my athletes is that we're so focused on protein that we're kind of missing the mark on other things. Whereas I'm encouraging people to be intentional about their protein and getting good protein sources in and quality protein and timing it right, especially in the post workout window, but also at our meal times and kind of putting those portions in a way that are going to support our protein needs. It's one of those things that like more isn't always better. It's about let's find the right amounts and let's find some quality sources for you. So typically for runners, endurance athletes, again, these numbers are always moving targets and it's very nuanced from person to person. But in general, like 1.2 to 1.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. 1.2 is on the lower end. I tend to not go that low. 1.8 on the higher end. Like if we have an injury that we're healing kind of in that catabolic state, it might be a little bit higher. But that's, kind of that typical range. And it's something I have a lot of athletes play around with to, okay, make sure we're getting enough protein, we're getting that quality protein in, but also not at the expense of carbohydrates. So my people who struggle to get over 200 grams of carbohydrates when their needs are 400 grams, we might dial that protein back a little bit, be more intentional with the timing and the quality as we work to dial those carbohydrates up and kind of find that better balance between the two macronutrients.
As we're thinking about that as it relates to going longer in races,
Mm-hmm.
when I first started going longer in racing in 2023, I guess it was a 6 hour race.
Mm-hmm.
And Kylie Van Horn suggested, a fellow dietitian, suggested
Mm-hmm.
that I consider some protein.
Mm-hmm.
So, at what point in the fueling process of an ultra or even a marathon that takes a long time, like
Yeah.
when and why should somebody consider adding protein into their plan?
Well, of course, to no surprise to either of us, the Queen Kylie is not wrong. Um, protein is definitely something I have athletes incorporate into their ultra plan. Not a ton, right? We're looking like maybe like 5 to 10 grams per hour, give or take, depending on the athlete and the duration.
At what point in the race? Not at the beginning, right?
Not at the beginning. We want to usually get like, depending on how long the race is and the person, we're getting at least 2 hours under our belt, if not like 2.5 to 3, if we're going to be going like if we're going to be hitting that 6 hour mark around that time, like 2.5 to 3 is when I'll have people start adding it in.
Even if someone is doing like when I'm
Mhm.
training for ultras, I'm routinely doing longer than 2.5 hours in training.
Yeah, well, you should be trying what you're doing on race day in training, right?
That's
I
true.
rest my case.
So I started at 4 hours,
Uh-huh.
and I had one beef stick
Yeah.
because it had a little salt and it was tasty.
Yeah.
But I was really nervous to like incorporate that
Mhm.
because things had been going so well, and my
Mhm.
GI system was things were going smoothly. What does it do, and why do we not hear people talking about this?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons I think is because honestly, when we're thinking about like ultra training, what are a lot of people using in their fueling? The
Food,
average person,
real
food,
food.
real food, right? And by the nature of the real food that we're eating, it's pretty easy to
Yeah,
get like that 5 to 10 grams per hour because it's not something like carbs where we have to be like really hyper focused on it. So I think it's just by the nature of what we're consuming because I have not worked with anyone who has taken straight gels for their entire ultra marathon, right? There's usually something else we're incorporating in there for the most part. So one, I think that's why we don't hear a lot about it because you don't have to think too hard. We're getting some real food in, depending what that looks like. But why we want to do this, it helps to mitigate muscle breakdown. Obviously, there is going to be some muscle breakdown, but that little bit of protein, that 5 to 10 gram hours, it helps to kind of cut those losses where your body starts to break down muscle for energy, those amino acid oxidation that can happen. It's also going to help a little bit after the race with muscle repair and recovery, reducing the damage and soreness. You're still going to be sore. Um, but it's also a key piece in that. And then also just by like the nature, right? The lower intensity, you're going to be out there a long time. It is going to give you like a little bit of satiation, right? Like staying power as well.
makes sense. If you go to a 100-mile race, you'll see as time goes along, you'll see people starting to consume recovery mix,
Mm-hmm.
which surprised me the first time
Yep.
that I saw that. Like people taking down scratch or tailwind recovery mix
Mm-hmm.
5-10 hours into a race with 5-10 hours left to go. It's like you're not done, but you're still taking like a third of a serving
Mm-hmm.
to get the 5 to 10 grams, which is a really interesting way to go
Yeah.
about it. And if it works for you,
And those
great.
products are really easy to digest, right? Like that's
Right.
the perk of that product. It's easy to digest. Your body's going to utilize it quickly. It's got some carbohydrate in it, a little bit of protein. Those recovery drinks, even though I am not ultra training, are on auto ship for me because I have them every day after every workout. Chalky
Yep.
milk, recovery powder.
Love it.
Yep.
For those who aren't familiar, I put together this podcast network of 35, almost 40 shows with the intent of creating a framework for non-running brands to play in the space.
Mm.
I want to create a scenario where brands that are relevant to runners can test their way into a space where they should fit and they don't currently have competition. So it's simple to do partnerships with watch brands, shoe brands, nutrition brands that make sports nutrition products, but there's a lot of noise in that space, and everybody seems to have their preferences already. For other products, like you've seen me share about recently, Caraway Home, they make kitchenware. Do I need kitchenware to help me run? No. Do I need to eat to help me run? Yes. So I'm constantly looking for, and I talk way more about this over on Substack and my other podcast, Long Run Labs, if people want to dive more into the business side of the outdoor space. But one of the other brands that I've been speaking to for like a year now is a meat delivery service called Good Ranchers. And the contact that I have over there, his name is Brad. He was doing partnerships for podcast networks for professional sports teams. And so he's quite familiar with what I'm attempting to do, which is bring more dollars into this space. And uh, obviously, meat and protein is not a thing that you're going to eat while you're running, but it's a thing that will help you as a runner. So I did a deep dive into my running data, my blood work, and all sorts of information from my training log. over the last 11 years, thanks to Claude. And Claude pointed out that I run best when my ferritin is high,
Mm.
high being above 70. That's not groundbreaking. Many of us know that ferritin is important to perform. But when my ferritin is low, I'll often note things in my training log like no power, or I was tired, or I didn't have any turnover in workouts or long runs or at higher altitudes. And so I've been trying to find a partner who can do this. And so we've landed on Good Ranchers. You and I have both been testing out the product, which
Mhm.
is meat delivery. It's delicious. Um, and again, we have 7 podcasts that they're sponsoring. So we have a couple of dietitians that are being sponsored, a couple of pro athletes over at Trail Society. Keely Henninger has been talking about iron and such for a decade now. Kern Malcolm and Hillary Allen also. So we have the validation of professional athletes. We have the validation of dietitians talking about it. When I approached you with this one, what were your thoughts about having a meat delivery sponsor?
Let's go, brother. That was my first thought. No, but like I said in a message offline that we were talking, I was like, this to me it's natural, right? Like to me, I've been a meat eater. Um, I find I had toyed with no red meat for a while in a past life, and then I started adding it back in and eating more of it, and I was like, wow, I feel better. And like, yes, we have the science and all of the information, but sometimes it is important for athletes to like, if we try something, let's see how it makes us feel and like how that stacks up over time. So for me, it's a no-brainer because two, just kind of knowing my habits, I need to be intentional about getting enough protein because I'm like carbs. I love carbs. But if I'm not as intentional or have options that I like, I can be picky about my protein and not get enough. So to me, having something like this where like I know I pick the box with a little bit more variety than some of the other hosts, with some with bacon. I was like, well, I have to get a box with bacon. I think I was the only one who got a box of bacon. Bacon, strip steaks, pork chops. I think there was some bratwurst, um, chicken nuggets. I love chicken nuggets. Some people cringe, but to me, one of the things we know about endurance training is that it can alter our appetite, but we know we have high energy needs. I always have some chicken nuggets in my freezer for when I'm like, my appetite kind of sucks right now, but like I know I need a meal.
It's always easy to eat nuggets.
It's always easy to eat chicken nuggets because you can put them in the air fryer. I usually do them with tater tots and a vegetable. Unfortunately, I've had a weird relationship with vegetables lately where I feel like a 5-year-old and I'm forcing myself just to keep it real. But anyways, circling back, like to me, now I have a freezer where I have options of like, I have low appetite and low bandwidth. Great. I'm going to take these chicken nuggets and put them in my air fryer. Or I have high bandwidth and I'm planning girl dinner with my friend tomorrow. And I said, hey, I'll bring some strip steaks over.
Hell yeah.
So, and it's nice because it's a variety of different proteins too. It's, because of course, like thinking about iron, thinking about protein, thinking about those nutrients is key. But we also need to think about that food is more than just fuel. It's like what texture, what taste, what flavors. Like, how can a pork chop? Great. I can season this and cook this a different way to give myself some variety. So I'm also not getting bored and disenchanted with eating.
Love it. Yeah. Showed up at my door and I was like, this is great because now it's just a bunch of different options in the freezer and the quality is super high. And Kate, my girlfriend, doesn't eat meat. And so
Mhm.
for me, it's like I have to buy it and cook it and eat it all immediately. And so the ability to have it frozen and can be like, yeah, tomorrow I'm
Individual.
going to do this. And in the individual packets too, the packaging is fantastic. So it's fun because they're doing a small media buy on, as they would consider it. But for
Mhm.
us, it's like a meaningful amount of investment in 7 running podcasts. And
Mhm.
so I wrote about this in a Substack, but it's like we saw what happened with Emma Bates, and we saw what happened with Grayson Murphy.
Hmm.
I'm releasing today is April 2nd. Tomorrow I have a podcast coming out with Grayson Murphy where she talked about announcing a new sponsor 7.5 months pregnant with
Hmm.
Solomon, whereas Emma Bates mentioned that UCAN dropped her and didn't renew her when they found out she was pregnant. And so the ability to bring brands like this into the space where the athlete as a pregnant mom or expecting mom or somebody who's not performing at their peak potential, like the ability to have these partners that are not requiring elite performance but still want the validation from athletes and dietitians and whatnot, like it's good for everyone
Hmm.
if we can get this going. So like the brand has seen a nearly $500,000 proposal of, okay, let's say this works, then what?
Hmm.
Then they're sponsoring 20 podcasts, they're sponsoring professional athletes, they're sponsoring races, and the top end of the sport can stop competing with each other from in regards to the ad dollars and partnership dollars that come from the shoe brands and watch companies and nutrition brands, and they can begin to explore or continue to explore like the stuff that's a part of their life. And this is like, for me, it's a fun challenge to see if we can make this happen. So the call to action for those listening who like eating meat and want it to show up at their door is go to goodranchers.com, use code IRON, which takes $25 off, and you save even more if you do a subscription, which also allows you to get an extra free product every time the box shows up. You can I'm getting a box every 6 weeks. You can do it every 8 weeks. You can do it, whatever you want
Hmm.
there. And then in a post-purchase survey, when they ask, how did you hear about Good Ranchers, mentioned For the Long Run, um, because if we can prove that this audience, meaning running broadly, is interested in a program and a company like this, I think it can start to really professionalize and protect the athletes and professionalize the media side of it quite a lot more than it currently is. So anyway, very long, rambly suggestion. If you want high quality protein to show up at your door, this is one of the ways to do it.
Yeah, I mean, and it's also delicious as well. But like you said, I don't know, I just look at how many people spend so much money on supplements that are unregulated. And like, yeah, supplements are something I use as a dietitian, very calculated, like in my practice. But like, this is actual food that we need to consume. But it's also quality, and again, can create that connection. You can plan a girl dinner with your meat box. And some of my friends were like, meat box, we got to have a smoker party. And I was like, let's smoke some meat,
Yeah,
you know?
that sounds great. What is firing you up in the running or nutrition space right now, or what hot takes are you dying to get off your chest?
Oh, what hot takes. Oh man. Guys, my one hot take for sure is I've always been a hard no to UCAN. And I'm glad that the internet has affirmed this for me, if nothing else, with their marketing tactics. And like, again, yes, we have been marketing products, but products that we believe in and we stand by. Whereas I look at their marketing and it's preying on runners, right? It's preying on people's vulnerabilities. And that is always what makes me cringe the most. So while I hate what happens, and I'm not a mom myself, but moms are amazing. We truly hate to see it. Um, but I'm glad it at least brought more light to people who may have been blindsided by their marketing tactics before. That, if a product is making you feel bad about yourself and how you look, or how fast you run, or eating sugar, that's usually a big, big red flag for me. So that is one of my hot takes. That's probably my biggest hot take right now. I was like, finally, right?
Yeah, it's a tough one. the product is great if you're a diabetic, right?
Yes.
And
I think that's the only time I've used it ever.
there are good people at that brand, and I feel for them.
Mm-hmm.
And like you, I have not experienced their marketing in a favorable manner, and I haven't
Mm-hmm.
experienced their product in a favorable manner as well. It used to be what I fueled with, and I
Yeah.
didn't I didn't know better. And I'm stoked for Emma Bates to see what happens when she puts more carbohydrates in her system in a
I
marathon.
know.
Like I can't wait to see how strong she can finish. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
she was taking other gels or carb mix in her bottles, but um, she's always finishing the race with the UCAN gel in her hand. So maybe that's what's going down at the end. And I don't want to disparage or pile on or anything, but to your point, like consumers need to be mindful of the intent and the way that messaging is delivered.
Mm-hmm.
And so when a brand is trying to make you feel bad about something or pushing low carb or like there's enough consensus to suggest that most runners should not be low carb athletes.
Yep.
There are outliers. It's by definition, if you're listening to this, you're probably not the outlier. It's just
Mm-hmm.
statistically, right? It's like when people are like, "Oh, I only need 5 hours of sleep." It's like it's very unlikely that you are the person that needs 5 hours of sleep versus 7 to 9. So yeah, I guess it's just like I don't know what guidance do you have as a dietitian with expert skills in nutrition communication? How do people keep an eye out for predatory marketing versus marketing is ultimately like trying to sell you a better version of yourself. If
Yes.
you can help somebody believe that the product or the service or the solution will lead to a better version of your existence, you might buy it.
Mm-hmm.
That's why so many car commercials have so little to do with the car and the act of driving, but it's like looking happy. It's being with beautiful people. It's like all of these like vibes versus the like the performance capabilities of this vehicle that they want you to spend $50,000 on. So
Mm-hmm.
how do people who don't have a bajillion hours of nutrition credential studying how, how do we go about navigating the internet these days?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of it is critical thinking. And also I always think of this example where a client sent me this whole post about, oh, sugar isn't the problem. You're not getting enough sodium, blah, 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 blah. Here's this study. I'm an internet doctor. And here's my code for Redmond's Relight, right?
Right,
So
if everybody's selling you something, and look, we just spent an hour making recommendations about products and services,
yep,
and it's a trust factor. I
yep,
wrote a piece about why fit compounds, and the whole piece was like you have a finite amount of social capital to make recommendations about
mm-hmm,
things on the internet. And if you're giving shit recommendations,
mm-hmm,
your ability to make recommendations and the belief that you're making good recommendations goes down. And
mm-hmm,
so for the longest time, this was not how I put food on my table, and I had the privilege of saying no to everything that I didn't want to promote. And so it trained me to only say
mm-hmm,
yes to things that I truly believe in. And I feel like that's trained my audience to also
mm-hmm,
acknowledge that, like, if I'm putting my name behind something, I've tested it, I've used it, I believe in it, and the people behind it are good people too.
yep,
And there's so much, and this isn't like this way is the best way, but there's so much junk out there that's being peddled because brands have big budgets and
yep.
they need their messaging out there. And so sorry, I cut you off before I jumped on
That's
my
okay.
long diatribe.
It's okay. I mean, like no trust, right? It's about being like, oh, okay, well, this guy says he's a doctor, but he has this code. Like, is this really clickbaity? Right? Is this messaging around this trying to make me scared? Or like I think about like, I think about the pink tax, right? I'm thinking about Alyssa Olnick, right? Is that how you say her last name? Dr. Liss, Doc Liss.
Yep.
And, every workout is being, pink bow slapped on it, preying on menopausal women and perimenopause. And, so it's kind of like, how much is this sensationalized? Like, how much is this clickbaity or rage baity or trying to get, prey at a fear of mine or an inadequacy, right? I also think about like, sorry, you can, the acts like a GLP-1,
Right.
right? What? Like, like anything with like these very grand promises. No, like sugar is bad, like automatically calling something bad out of nowhere, right? And it's like when I think about it in the nutrition standpoint too, and thinking about like the dose makes the poison, right? So if you're, when everybody's like Cheerios cause cancer, what is it? You have to eat. I don't know the number, but it's something like you have to eat an egregious amount of Cheerios to get like any sort of like cancer causing things, right? It's the dose makes the poison. Like, is this something that's like so inflated and like meant to make you scared? That's usually, or feel bad about yourself. Like moms as well, like new moms and moms in general are constantly preyed upon in marketing because they are in a very vulnerable state, a very big life change. So thinking about that, thinking about like marketing that is like pushing like to look a certain way, especially in the runners and fitness category. Like influencers kind of like using their body as their business card, right? Like they tend to not have your best. Maybe that macro coach can help you lose 10 pounds in 2 months or whatever it is. But like, do they have your health in their best interest? Probably not, right? Like, is somebody, in my space, are they going with a health first approach? Are they kind of riding that middle line versus like being on extremes? Those are usually some of the, I could go on and on. I'm getting into a tangent in my head here.
I love it. This has been awesome. Hopefully for everyone that's made it this far, they found it informative and they've learned about some great brands. Um, Stevie, appreciate you and your wisdom as always, and the approachable way that you communicate like deeply complicated topics. Um, for those who want to follow along with you and your food posts, your triathlon posts, and your dog posts, where can we find you on your corner of the internet?
Yeah, you can find me at Stevie Lyn on Instagram. That's one N on the LYN. And you can also find me at stevielynrd.com, my podcast, Real Fuel with SLS. And you can check out my book, Power Up, A Young Woman's Guide to Winning with Sports Nutrition.
Love it. Stevie, we did it. Thank you so
We did
much.
it. Thank you.